Hi, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. Be joined once again today by my amazing co-host, Bob Greaves, who has been bouncing all around his house trying to come up with a way he could broadcast from outside instead of being cooped up in his little studio. So, I apologize to him and to um, everybody that we weren't able to make that happen. But I today wanted to focus on a topic that I introduced a little bit last week until I remembered that we had picked another one for last week. So um, that topic is tribalism. And what I mean by tribalism is in-group, out-group reasoning. The idea that you're either with us or against us, or you're either friend or foe. The false dichotomy that people have, and of course, the tendency to circle the wagons and defend your own or those within your own tribe, and attack those without, even if those within your tribe are the ones who are in the wrong and those without are perfectly or acting perfectly acceptable or are even right in what they are saying. And I think that this is an important topic because this is not one that is specific to any group or um, individual area of our lives. There's no philosophy that is exclusively devoid of tribalism. And I think that, frankly, when we fight against religion so much on this network and on this show, that is one form of tribalism and one way that it takes. And frankly, it's been one major way that's promoted itself and promoted this kind of reasoning for millennia. So it is certainly a significant one, but it is incumbent upon us, if we're going to fight against this source of it, to recognize that it's not the only source, and that even if we were to completely find a way to do away with all organized religion and have it only be free believers or atheists or agnostics or however you want to call yourself, we still need to recognize that we are tribal animals, and that's a harmful thing for us to do, to gather in these ways and to reject other people. And I'm arguing now for an expansion of the tribe in our minds, or at least a goal of doing that. I think that our minds are only capable of truly considering a a tribe of those that you personally know and like in most parts. But I think that a secondary level needs to be extended for all of humanity, at least, if not all of life, for us to recognize that there's things that unites all of us, even if there's also things that can divide us. And the important thing for us to focus on is that which unites us. I wanted to say specifically that this is related to, and I've been involved in a a battle going on with infighting on the or in the atheist community. I've touched a little bit about this in the past, but very specifically, there's been sort of a schism almost, and a culture war of sorts going on within the atheist, skeptic, secular community, primarily online. And it started with something relatively simple. A guy making a verbal advance towards a woman he was attracted to in an elevator, and her feeling uncomfortable by it and saying that the next day. And that was it. It was, neither of them acted in an extremely inappropriate way. But what happened is it galvanized people into these two camps that were her camp or the his camp, and then anybody who was even remotely criticized or criticizing what the well, her name is Rebecca Watson, for the record. It's the incident in question is Elevator Gate, is the name that it's been called. So if you'd like to Google it, by all means do so. But the feminist side of it has been taking Rebecca Watson's angle, and I even have been accused of doing something that they've called mansplaining, because I've criticized somebody for making an assessment of a completely unrelated thing, two posts on the website Reddit, in ways saying, look at how bad women are treated. And they're right that women are not treated well on the website Reddit, but they used a bad example of it. And for even trying to criticize that it was a bad example of that, I was written off as a sexist mansplainer that needed that couldn't recognize that women had their own lived experience. And on the other side of the camp, there's your men's rights activists, those who think that people questioning the privilege that men have and asking for equal rights are really trying to take our rights away and trying to subjugate them. And it, in my mind, is nothing different from the Christians in the United States who talk about being persecuted, because it's really, really hard to be persecuted when you have all of the power. And in the world today, yes, there's men who do have some bad things happen, and there are realms in which men do not have equal rights. For example, custody battles with children. I know that there's plenty of my friends, as I've talked about in the last few shows, going through divorces that are concerned about that, because the assumption is either, well, 50-50 custody, but placement goes with the mother, because women get preferential treatment in that small, tiny realm that is outweighed by so many other situations where men get the preferential treatment. And that's what I think these men's rights activists are completely disregarding. And frankly, it's silly to treat everybody as if they're either one or the other, or they're falling into these categories. And it's been humiliating for everybody within it, or it should be humiliating, to have made this spectacle of ourselves. And we continue to do this, and everybody continues to do this. I was just recently part of the drafting of a letter that, or a petition of sorts, calling for rationality in these subjects, and recognizing that people make mistakes and people might say something that could be interpreted in a way that is insulting or hurtful or even sexist, racist, or in some way prejudicial or privileged. But we need to look at the intention that people have in these, and we need to recognize that even if there is a mistake, people can learn from their mistakes, they can grow from their mistakes, and the number one thing that we can do as humanity itself is to unite and find things that bring us all together, instead of finding all of these stupid, nuanced little points to hate each other over. So, now that I'm off of my soapbox here, I wanted to say, Bob, thank you for joining us for the show today. And I wanted to get your take on this, because I know this is something that I am guaranteed to get some interesting perspective from you on.
Well, many people may not know this, but I do come from a rather financially well-off background. And of course, when my wife and I got married, we both had auto-implanted tasers. So we're both very well behaved with each other. Just, I one of the things I think is interesting is that this is an anthropological dynamic. It is something that we do as human beings. And that religion has often been accurately accused of being, excelling at this. But I think that it's false to think that this is caused by religion. It's just that religion tends to be 150 to 500 years behind the times, culturally speaking. And as a result, anthropologically, since this is where human beings were 150 to 500 years ago, it's not surprising that religion is there now. But I think that part of what we see is in this dynamic when we study it anthropologically is this. When there are individuals with whom we never have face time, people whom we never get to know, never get to work through times in their life, that these people become to us without our realizing it subhuman. They're not real people, and as a result, they're more like props in my life that I find I have to rearrange, much as I would the weeds in the garden, and that as the global population changes in terms of our capacity to be interconnected, I think we're seeing both an increase in the conflicts that can create and a reduction in the conflicts as we become more and more a connected community. I mean, you and I, here we're talking, you are uh, in a very core sense an atheist, and I, in a very core sense, am a theist. And you and I have been chit-chatting with each other now regularly since August. When you stop to think about it, a week has not gone by where we haven't had several conversations, not just on our show, but several conversations with each other on Skype or what have you, and many times even interacting on Facebook. We've gotten to know each other while we're going through also issues in our lives. And so as a result, I think the friendship that you and I have developed is not just the result of the fact that you and I are friendly people capable of having a friendship, but we've actually taken the time to be connected and engaged in each other's life so that we have become friends, you know? And there's a sense in which that connection has occurred. And I think that where we see a lot of these divisions, this takes place where we have a lack of real friendship. And I personally, I liked a lot of what you had to say there. I really think that men and women are in many ways different. Let's talk about the division between sexes. But I have adamantly insisted for years that any philosophy that creates we have it together, what's wrong with you guys? Any philosophy that does that fails to appreciate and empathize with the real concerns and problems that we have, and faces, it doesn't face those challenges. Men do not know what it is like to be a woman, and they don't seem to really want to know many times. And the same is true with women who don't really want to know what it's like to be a man. And so as a result, when we see these differences, we assume, and here's the big thing, when I perceive a woman behaving in a particular way and I try to make sense of that behavior, the first thing I do, which is really stupid, is I try to understand what would motivate me to behave that way. And then I assume that's her motivation. And that's not true. And of course, I think that women can do that with men. And instead of recognizing that each of us are making the observations, the choices from the vantage point from which we come from biologically, culturally, and various other things that influence this. And there's a sense in which we really can't be other than this. And although there may be changes we need to make, those changes will only come about effectively when we appreciate, empathize, understand, and connect with each other. So I think it's very important. This is true whether you're talking about Israeli and Palestinians, whether you're talking about men and women, whether you're talking about whites and blacks, whether you're talking about poor and wealthy. All of these divisions that we seem to like in our all of these different us and thems we have in the numerous Venn diagrams we draw in our culture. I liked what Jim Palmer says. We need to kind of erase these lines, and I can't stop being a man. That'll never happen, and I don't want to ever have to apologize for being a man, and I refuse to do that. But I don't want to then feel that, oh, okay, so I need to make people who aren't Americans apologize. I need to make these human beings who aren't men apologize. That isn't going to work, and so. We need to become more honestly, openly, and regularly connected to each other.
I love what you said about not being able to stop being a man, and also the point that we tend to look at things and say, what would my motivation be, and then project that onto other people. Because you're absolutely right. As a man, I may not ever understand anything about the motivation and all of the different things that can go through a woman's mind, because I've not lived the same even remotely same experiences that a woman has. I find one of the best examples of this is actually brought about with these the feminism arguments here, that the thing that's been criticized, or that the women have been criticized for the most, have been saying that they haven't felt safe, that they don't feel safe. There's been a bunch of men who have been insulted by that, and I can understand that it makes perfect sense to say, well, we're not dangerous. You shouldn't feel unsafe. I mean, even that guy in the elevator, he asked her to come back to his room and have a cup of coffee, and she declined, and that was the end of it. He didn't chase her, he didn't pursue her, he didn't like lean up against the wall and give her one of the creeper moves. And she said that, she told him he didn't do anything that was scary, or any behavior that would indicate a threat, but it made her feel unsafe. And I think that men, specifically men that I I, I hate to pigeonhole too much, but they're men that are not frail, um, and can't understand the same perspectives when we don't need to. Right? I've walked around in at night alone in the streets of New York City and never once felt for or fear that I might be raped. I've never been in a situation with several other men that I was concerned that I was going to become a sexual plaything of theirs with against my will. I guess it's potentially possible, but the statistics of it are so slim. And frankly, I'm a big enough dude. I can fight back. And I'm going to make a biological argument here in saying that we have a very large degree of sexual dimorphism in our species. Men are larger and stronger than women, uh, almost as a rule. I mean, the women's world bench press record is 407 pounds. I used to work at the gym up the road, and I knew at least a dozen men who could bench press that much just here in town. That's a very, very significant difference when we recognize um, that we're bigger and we're stronger, and that means that it's not likely that most men have any sort of perspective to understand the kinds of apprehensions and the kinds of fears that women do need to deal with as a part of their lives, because they're simply outside of the scope of our reality.
The best way that that I think that some men can begin to appreciate that is something that I heard a woman say uh, when a man was talking about how uncomfortable he is when he's around gay men, and he was trying to understand why does he feel so uncomfortable, in spite of the fact that he was really attempting to entertain a far more open attitude about it. And the woman suggested to him that, well, you're not accustomed to being in the presence of somebody who finds you sexually attractive and can perhaps overpower you, and that this could explain some of the male reaction to, in their homophobia, is that they feel they're up against a challenge that could possibly overpower them, and that's a feeling and an experience and a circumstance men rarely find themselves in. And I thought that was insightful, as no doubt a contributing factor to where some of that homophobia and the anger that some men have, and that because they're in a situation that as men who usually tend to live in a heterosexual world, they never experience that. It's just foreign to them.
That's a wonderful point, and I think it also really it helps explain the difference in the homophobia levels between men and women. I think I've personally read stories of women who end up sort of almost defaulting to romantic relationships with other women after having been victimized by men enough times in their lives, but they still seek the companionship because women are not as threatening to them. And it's something that I can't understand the shift in personal tastes and preference in that respect. But I mean, I can certainly understand the fear and the aspect and the fact that women are less threatening to other women. So
it's
that
it's
makes
it's not that well known, but there are definitely some couples where you'll have a married couple where he's gay and she's lesbian, and then they have an open relationship. It's a safe environment for both of them. Uh,
hmm
Awkward and odd, but I think that we're touching on something that is a part of this dynamic and the tribalism dynamic in itself, and that is um, we just because we don't have the same context does not mean we can't develop a stronger empathy to at least imagine or put ourselves into the position of other people to really appreciate how it is they must feel. And empathy is a huge part of this. And empathy isn't easy. A lot of us, when we try to empathize, we find ourselves getting sucked in. I start like if I'm trying to empathize with a person who's depressed, I might start getting depressed. If I'm trying to empathize with a person who's angry, I get angry. And the ability to truly plug into how someone else is feeling, to the degree that it is actually generating some of those emotions in me, but I'm not actually personally having those emotions as my own response. That's a difficult parenthesis for many people to create. But the more we can create that kind of a parenthesis, where I set myself aside and I plug into somebody else's context, allow myself to feel much like what I would imagine they feel, but without owning it as my own. The more we can develop that kind of empathy with other people, I think the more we can kind of bridge this gap. Even when we don't understand it, we can at least appreciate it.
We have some viewer comments. First, this one I have to say this is the most interesting phenomenon, and I love it and I appreciate it. But Bob, the atheists, they love you. We've got one here. It's Bob gives me hope for theists everywhere. Um, it's yeah, I think that you really are doing um, a wonderful job of showing atheists, and even in my own eyes, that you've really helped me gain perspective on um, the different ways that somebody can have a very thoroughly thought through and very deeply considered and analyzed belief in a God that is not a crazy fundamentalism. So, thank you for that, and that's the viewer is saying that as well. Uh,
Well, thank you. And unfortunately, it's kind of sad. Um, uh, if I could confess something, so I remember one time with
you
someone
know,
on
we're
Facebook.
all about censoring people's honesty here, so no.
Okay, I'll do it anyway. On Facebook, one time I remember somebody in a Free Believers network was asking me, how how do you come up with these concepts? I mean, almost as if they thought I was ingenious. And the the odd thing is, here's the honest truth: it's easy when you just
I'm
give
plagiarizing all of it.
mindset and just be a human being. It sort of comes naturally. And so that it's not really all that insightful necessarily all the time. And that so unfortunately there's almost this religious mentality that that to me is, of course, from my standpoint, is irreligious. It's like it's insulting. To but anyway, I just wish it was far more common. I tell you, as I've gotten to know Dr. Jones, when I first met him, even my wife was saying to me, "Oh my goodness, you find somebody else who's thinking a lot like you do," and it's sort of like a lonely world for people who do take their faith seriously, but don't take the tradition of faith as having any sort of the kind of integrity it wants to claim it has. And so I was just one of those who found I couldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, literally, you know.
Well, and that's an interesting point too on the tribalism side of it here is that I think we all do seek out others that are like us in ways because it's comforting and it's we're social animals. It's very nice for us to have that interaction with like-minded people. I for one find it really interesting that some of the people that I enjoy having conversations with the most are very passionate believers, specifically because they're very passionate about the subject. And there's plenty of atheists out there. Even among my group of friends, I have many atheistic friends that simply are almost apathetic to the subject, and it's one that interests me, and I'm very passionate about it. So I can talk and talk and talk, and they don't care, and they're like, "Okay, we're great." But I've mentioned him before. One of my best friends is Jehovah's Witness, and he loves to talk about this subject, and we're both able to, even though we're in different camps, so to speak, to have respectful conversations with each other. We like each other, and to very strongly support our own positions, but on a subject that we mutually feel passionate about. And I think that overall, that's another way that we can get past tribalism is starting to look instead of looking for things that we disagree about. I can't even say that because disagreement isn't a bad thing. Instead of looking for things that we can fight about, look for things that we can mutually be, or subjects that we can mutually be passionate about, even if we disagree. And that will really help as long as we can check our emotions and our tendency to be insulted instead of seeing people from their perspective. At the door, we can get a lot further.
And
We do have a
we'll find as we make these connections that that some of the criticisms that have been aimed at the group I feel okay to be a part of, the tribe that I'm a part of, we'll be more able to see that some of the criticisms leveled toward us were quite accurate. And we'll also be able to see that some of the criticisms that we leveled at other tribes were not really honest or fair. I find that even another example of this is in the poor versus the wealthy. Um, they both have a tendency to see the other side in some exaggerated caricature of the other. Many of the times the wealthy will see poor people as lazy, not really motivated, don't care about things that are important. They'd rather live on welfare, and although there are some people you could put into that category, the vast majority of people who are not wealthy, that doesn't describe them at all. And the same thing with wealthy people. They're not all misers. They're not all just self-centered. Many of them can be very compassionate people who are actually living in a world where they don't really know who their friends are because of the way people hang around them with their money or whatever, And so it's with these two groups understanding each other, there's a lot of misunderstanding they have to get beyond, and the way both groups feel about each other. Also, I'll tell you this: one of the biggest things I've known, and as I've even studied the social rift between the poor and the wealthy, is that the poor haven't had the opportunity to appreciate proper ways of handling money, and they don't realize that many of the wealthy people understand properly how to handle their money and how to think about money. And many wealthy people, if they were to lose everything, would gain it back in a brief period of time because they understand how to approach the issue. Whereas many poor people, when they become suddenly, if they have a windfall, shortly thereafter, they're back in that poor house.
And the local casino gets a windfall as well.
Yeah, and there's something, there's something that wealthy people are doing that's the right thing to do with assets, and not to say that everything they do with them is right, and that there isn't any hoarding, or that there isn't any lack of. There's oftentimes a lack of fairness in how it is they tend to acquire it, and the formulas used. I don't believe the CEOs are really worth 780% of what the average worker in their company is. That's 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 just not right.
I have to agree. We actually have a viewer that chimed in on this one as well to say, yes, I find that all poor people drastically underestimate how truly great I am. Um, well played, viewer. We have a couple more comments here.
Oh, a
That
potential tither.
hmm?
I said, oh, a potential tither. Good. Just kidding.
Right. Yes. All right. Um, so you got your viewer comment. This one's towards me. I gotta toot my horn here a little bit. Greg makes a brilliant argument in favor of non-genetic homosexuality among women. I'd never thought of that, and I'm sure that's a perspective that most of your anti-gay activists haven't thought about, and sad to say, would probably ignorantly dismiss. Um, I think that the end of that is the truest point there. That there's the ignorance of dismissing something of that nature, and the refusal to even acknowledge that it's a potential um, or cause of non-genetic homosexuality among women is a really telling thing. I think that it's once again the tribalism and feeling attacked, even if you're not. And that's we do have the other viewer comment here is that modern tribalism often takes the form that says you're not welcome because you're not getting the point. Um,
Yeah.
it's very true. I have another story here to say. I recently was attacked for being anti-Semitic. I was actually when I woke up this morning, I saw this was on my page on Facebook. I had shared an image that was from a Dutch, I think, or Norwegian um, newspaper of some sort, a political cartoon that was a criticism of circumcision, but not showing circumcision. It was actually, my understanding of it, a criticism of parental rights and the religious exemptions that are granted to people to do things that would never be allowed if it weren't for the fact that they're calling it a religious exercise. And I thought that was a brilliant criticism. And this person has been attacked by groups all around the country or all around the world, saying that it was the most anti-Semitic thing put out in years, and it would have made Hitler proud. And the cartoonist himself actually had responded to it and saying, "I have no idea what you're talking about. This was not even intended to be a Jewish person." And frankly, circumcision is not a Jewish exclusive
Oh no.
practice, nor are other religious things that parents do to their
Practices up
kids.
until
We
recently.
have the
Yeah.
Christian Scientists that refuse them blood transfusions, and Jehovah's Witnesses that refuse blood transfusion, Christian Scientists that withhold insulin from their type 1 diabetic children. Um, and all of them were being poignantly criticized through this cartoon.
Yeah. If I could brag on somebody who probably doesn't even know I'd brag on them, uh, I took a course from a Dr. Leslie Gates once. She's a sociologist, and some of the students didn't like her because she was a rigorous teacher. I loved her. I thought she was fantastic. Yeah, but I mean, her lectures were dense. She had a lot to say. She had a well worked out argument of the various things that she was presenting, and it was a sociology class. It was a class where we studied the history of 17 different feminist movements and to take a look at some of their distinctive arguments of how they defined the problem of gender inequality, what they saw as the cause, what they saw as the solution, and how they morally evaluated the various dynamics involved. And we looked at I think some 17 different movements, and it opened my eyes to I had no idea that there were all of these different flavors of the issue, and of course one of them was the stop sleeping with the enemy group. That people who were choosing a lesbian lifestyle, not because they were sexually oriented that way, but because this was their statement of how they fought gender inequality. And yeah, it's been at times a very significant movement. But I'll tell you, it was a marvelous course, And I really would recommend that a lot of men take a course like that, where they take a look at various movements. It would be wonderful if we could have courses that I'd love to see it in a college, at the college level, that takes a look at the Crusades, for example, to take a look at the various different ways that the Christian church has launched out at militarily at other cultures, and the Inquisitions and things like this, and not for the purposes of just bad mouthing, and I didn't get the impression that Dr. Leslie Gates was trying to badmouth men. We were just studying the various different ways that women in perceiving themselves in an unequal place saw the problem, to find it, organize it, to work around it, and to work toward a solution. Fascinating course. I loved it a lot, and I think it helped enlarge me as a person in many ways.
Yeah, I can't agree more that there's a huge value to trying to understand the positions that other people come from, and I think that's the other side of the tribalism is not only projecting your own position onto other people, but also a failure to even attempt to grasp their position. I mean, it's difficult to do that. To say how can somebody be racist? How can somebody be against gay marriage or interracial marriage? How can somebody um, uh, have such a hatred for immigrants?
It's
Whatever
definitely
position
the
it
tribal
is.
dynamic, isn't it? It's really back to this tribal dynamic. We need to be honest about the fact that this is apparently um, a natural starting point for many of us, and I don't think it's necessarily in and of itself an evil thing. It's just an evil thing that we don't outgrow it. I mean, think about it. We come into the world. When we first come into the world, now I don't know. I can't remember what it was like for me to be a newborn baby. Those memories are gone, of course. But from studying the development of the cognitive development of baby, this baby can't possibly originally be aware of the fact that there's anything other than being. And the differentiation to, oh, there's that which is outside of me and that which is inside of me. Oh, there's that which is me and that which is other than me, other people. Um, the discovery of how the world they are now thrown into differentiates is the process of development. And as we go through that development, the idea that that which I have become aware of is valuable and that which I have yet to become aware of must not be valuable is a constant ongoing lesson. And I think that tribalism probably, while mankind is not yet maturing, was probably a very essential part of our existence uh, until we had developed some better methods of connecting. But now we're getting to the point where we need to outgrow this. I think we can. We outgrow it, first of all, in our families, don't we? When you have brothers and sisters, you learn how to treat them as the inset, and we just need to, like you said earlier, we need to expand the us until it includes all of us, and to get rid of this exclusionary developmental impediment that where we come to a certain point and we just stop right there, and just refuse to move on. This is where I think even my concept of multi-axialism comes in. And this might irritate a lot of people. If you're a liberal, if you're a conservative, if you're a libertarian, if you're any of these things, in my opinion, you're narrow-minded. You should be all of these things and more. You should recognize that each of these lenses has a way of looking at the world and looking at its problems, looking at its solutions, and none of them are necessarily good, bad, or indifferent. They're just different ways of looking at it. And if you really want to solve real problems, you can't solve problems as we understand them. You have to solve them as they are. And therefore, all of the different ways that you can view a problem and be honest in viewing it that way will give you more and more insight as to, how it might be that we can actually deal with the problem instead of our philosophy about the problem. People are loyal to their philosophy and not loyal to reality, because I guarantee you reality is a lot bigger than anybody's philosophy.
It was Shakespeare. That, I always think of it in the Tim Minchin poem Storm, where I would then misquote it. But there's more things that exist in heaven and earth than in your philosophy. Something of.
Yeah.
Anyway, we only have
Tim Minchin,
about.
what a great guy. I tell you, I have seen several of his videos. He is intelligent, he is funny, he is relevant. What a guy. I tell you,
We're gonna get
people
him
should.
on the show someday. It's gonna have to be like a 2 hour special because he'll be from overseas, or maybe next time he's in the States. I don't know, but I've got to get him on our network here, especially with you being
Yeah.
the recording artist and understanding things. It's we're gonna get him. This is our project and our mission now. But I did want to. We only have about 6 minutes left in the show here until I go overtime by a couple more minutes. But uh, we, hey, Joey's lying to me. He says we have 1 minute left. That's ridiculous. Um, he thinks this is a show that ends at 6:45. That's silly. Anyway, we have. There's one thing that I wanted to cover a little bit more about, and that's specifically the reason that I brought up the accusations of anti-Semitism is I think a big part of the tribalism that does manifest in humans is beyond just the us versus them understanding, but also our hypersensitivity to outgroup criticism. It's very different for me to be a friend of yours and say, listen, you're acting inappropriately or something is not a good idea, than for me to be a complete stranger because the first reaction that we tend to have is, who are you to tell me this, to talk to me like this? And I think that it was you who actually said it best, I think, Bob, in saying that this is not us versus them, this is this versus that. And we need to recognize that um, the right or the responsibility to accept constructive criticism is tantamount to um, progress to if we're going to accomplish anything. And like these criticisms that say, "Oh, anti-Semitism," is because they're criticizing something that Jewish people do. Other people do it as well, and it was in a way. I'm sure they have other sensitivities. There was an infant in the picture. There was blood drawn in the picture. There was somebody with a beard and hat on that could be or thought of as a rabbi. There was nothing specifically to indicate no special robes or Star of David or any of the caricatured stereotypes that you would imagine could be used in this situation if we really wanted to make it an anti-Semitic piece. But their sensitivity is what caused them to overreact, to see this as an attack on them when they're not. And that's okay. Frankly, we can't avoid how we react to things. It's something that
We need to own that reaction as ours. Whenever I feel anything, and I've been a big proponent of this concept, whatever I feel, that is the automatic precipitation of my focus and my perspective. I can't blame that feeling on anybody.
I have a friend who states pretty categorically that she doesn't like what I do on my Facebook or page, Inspiring Doubt, because she says that it's insulting. A lot of what we put is insulting to believers. And I can't disagree that a lot of the things that I share are insulting to believers. But I think that that's oversimplification. And again, the tribalistic understanding of it is that it is insulting and therefore it is bad. But we need to recognize the motive of me sharing these is not to insult a believer. It is to question or criticize a belief or a practice that these believers happen to hold or do. And they take that as insulting. They are insulted by what I've said, but my intention was not to insult. It was simply to question or to criticize. And if we get stuck on the insult and we make that a hitching point, we can't get past that. We need to recognize that if somebody says something that insults us, yes, you have the right to be insulted, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong.
Right? And
And
it's true. And, and you know, I think it's a sign of maturity. This is kind of arrogant, perhaps, to say. A sign of maturity is when we realize that the opinions that we hold, the point of view that we hold, is really the result of our own history. And it's if we had had a different history, we would no doubt have different opinions. And so I think it's very important for me to realize that my opinion, my view, my understanding of reality is not what I should consider my identity. It is simply my current location.
Well, I think we are out of time for this week, Bob. But I did want to say that I may want to continue this conversation a bit next week because we have a few comments that have come on this subject and sort of the opposite end of the spectrum and saying, I think tribalism is bad for the most part. However, I think there is an argument to be made for people being allowed to exist in groups that they're comfortable with. I
Sure.
have a group of friends, and I'm happy when others want to be part of my group. However, sometimes I enjoy the company of only those that I've become the most comfortable with. And they've continued. I don't know if it's the same viewer or somebody else, but I'm assuming the also in this indicates the same person. I also don't think it's fair to force groups to always be open to outsiders, though I do think
I
that
think
all
I
groups should
agree with both
allow.
of those. I agree
Well,
with
let me
both those
finish.
comments.
Hold on. I'm reading their quote here, Bob.
All right.
Though I do think that all groups should allow time and opportunity for outsiders. Okay, now go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with those comments. That it's a matter of whether or not we allow ourselves to be multimodal. You know, are we always in one mode? You know, am I always just a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant? Things like that. And I'm a musician. When I get together with other musicians and we all have instruments, to be honest with you, I'd really rather be together with people who know how to play. you know,
I I understand that. All right. Well, on that note, we may have to revisit this a bit next week and talk about that other nuance. But for the time being, this is the end of our show for this week. Thank you for joining us. This has been Inspiring Honesty, and stick around for the Unconventional Pastor with Bob Graves, my incredible co-host, up next, and of course, the Place with Dr. Michael W. and his wife Rhonda Jones. Join us again next week. Have a great week.